1994, Brad had just graduated high school and he wasn't too sure what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. So him and his chocolate lab headed up to his parents' cabin up in the mountains of Washington state. Little did they know that their trip was going to be cut short by an aggressive Sasquatch. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness, where I share encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter you would like to share, please email it to me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, as I'll be uploading 3 to 5 times every week. So don't forget to load that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. In the early summer of 1994, right after Brad had graduated high school, he did not know what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. All of his buddies, they had their lives planned out. Some of them were going off to college, some were joining the army, and some were just going right into the workforce. But Brad, he had no idea what he wanted to do. So he thought a good way for him to kind of collect his thoughts was for him to go out to his dad's cabin up in the mountains of Washington state. Brad's dad was a Vietnam War vet, and shortly after returning from Vietnam, his dad had bought this property. His dad, when he got home, just wanted to escape society, just live off on his own for a while. So that's exactly what his dad had done. He bought this property. He actually lived there for a few years before he met Brad's mom. So Brad figured this was the perfect place. This is where he could go, be all alone, collect his thoughts, and try to figure out what he was going to do going forward. So early Saturday morning, loaded his Jeep with all of his gear, grabbed his chocolate lab, and they made the 6-hour drive out to the cabin. To get to the cabin, they had to take the highway that went up through the mountains, and at one point they actually had to turn off the highway onto this gravel road. They had to drive 6 miles down this gravel road that went up the side of a mountain, and then at one point there's a little tiny narrow drive that runs off this gravel road, and it runs for 3/4 of a mile, and that's where Brad's cabin was. So they turned, they went down that driveway, got to the cabin. Brad got out of the Jeep, went up to the front door, unlocked it, and now he had to open the cabin up. See, whenever they would leave, they would always put these bear spikes, so it's a board with a bunch of nails sticking up out of it. They would put that along by the doors and along the windows. That's just to keep the bears from trying to get into the cabin or a shed or any type of property, really. So Brad removed all those, he took boards off the windows, and opened the cabin up. That afternoon, Brad decided he was going to go for a hike with his dog. So him and his dog left the cabin, they walked down that narrow drive up to that main gravel road. When they got to the gravel road, they actually walked about a mile further down to where there was this old logging road that went up the side of the mountain. So they walked about 2 miles up this logging road, and it came to where the bush line started to thin out at a bit of a plateau. So when they got to the plateau, Brad saw a big log, and he decided that's the perfect place for me to sit for a while, have a snack, and just kind of relax and just stare out at the scenery. So Brad went, he sat on this log, and he was looking out at this valley in between these two mountains. And in the middle of this valley, there's a bit of a lake, and there's a little river that flows from that lake. So Brad just kind of sat there for about 20 minutes, just looking at the scenery in front of him, just relaxing and just enjoying being alone with his dog. After about 20 minutes, he decided, okay, let's start heading back to the cabin now. So they made their way back down that logging road. And when they got to that main gravel road, Brad looked off to his left and he saw somebody walking towards him. So he just kind of stood there and he was looking, trying to figure out who this is walking towards him. So he's looking and this figure's getting closer and closer, and he realizes it's a man, and he has a rifle slung over his shoulder and he has a big revolver on his waist. So Brad's kind of looking, trying to figure out exactly who this guy is. And as the guy got closer, all of a sudden he realized, hey, it's actually our neighbor from about 1.5 miles down the road. So the neighbor came up, started talking to Brad, and the neighbor actually asked him if he had seen his dog. He had a golden retriever, and the neighbor said that he hadn't seen this dog for about 2 days now. He said his dog was acting a little skittish, and it ran off into the woods, and he hasn't seen it since. So Brad said, no, I haven't seen your dog. If I do see it, though, I'll definitely let you know. I'll keep my eyes open. The neighbor then went on to tell Brad that he had been having a problem with this really big bear. He said this bear kept trying to get into his cabin. He said that this bear actually went into their chicken coop and took a bunch of chickens out of it. So that made Brad a little nervous, knowing that there's a big aggressive bear that's trying to get into cabins and it's stealing chickens. So he was feeling a little nervous because now he's still almost 2 miles from his cabin and he's unarmed. So Brad just kind of said to his neighbor, okay, I'll keep my eyes open, grabbed his dog, and he actually went down the road pretty quick, tried to get back to his cabin before darkness. When he got to his cabin, first thing he did is he went into the master bedroom, he said, and in the master bedroom there's a closet. So he went into this closet, and on the left-hand side there was a loose board. So he grabbed the board, pulled the board down, and inside the wall was an old lever action 30-30 that his dad had always stashed there just in case a bear came. So Brad pulled the 30-30 out, grabbed a box of shells, loaded it up, and he was just going to keep it close by just in case that bear that's been tormenting his neighbor tries to get into his cabin. Shortly after, he made dinner for himself and his dog, and then he spent the rest of the night, he just spent it reading. About 1 o'clock in the morning, he decided he was going to go to bed. So he went into the master bedroom, climbed into bed, he had his dog up on the bed with him, and he went to sleep. At 2 in the morning, he said he was awoken by the sound of his dog whimpering. He said his dog was whimpering and scratching underneath the bed. It was trying to get underneath the bed. And he said that's not what his dog normally behaved like. He said his dog was normally not scared of anything, so it really concerned him that his dog was so frantically trying to get under that bed. So he said he sat up in the bed, started tapping the bed to get his dog to jump up, and the dog would not come out from underneath the bed. He said then all of a sudden he heard from on the front porch, he also heard a loud creaking sound on the deck. So he said his first thought was, that bear that's been tormenting my neighbor is on my front porch and it's trying to come through my door. So he got up out of bed and grabbed the 30-30 and he walked across the cabin towards the front door. Right at the front door, there's a little window off to the left. So he looked through that window and he was looking towards the bush line. And you could see the side of his porch in front of him, and he saw nothing. So because he didn't see anything, he decided he was going to step outside onto the porch just to take a look around and see if he could see this bear. So he went to the door, opened it up, and he stepped out onto the porch. He said as soon as he stepped onto the porch, he was hit with this horrible smell. He said it just smelled like old rotten garbage. So now he's really thinking for sure this is that bear. Like has to be a big bear because this smell is horrible and whatever was on the porch sounded heavy. So he's looking around and he decides, you know what? I'm just going to fire a shot up into the air and scare this bear away so I don't have to deal with it anymore tonight. So he lifts his rifle up, fires a shot up into the air, and as soon as he shot, he heard something really big and heavy running through the bush into the forest. He said for a second it sounded like it was running on 2 legs and not 4, but he figured it must have just been his imagination because he's just freaked out. It was just a bear, so he went back into the cabin, locked the front door, and he went back to the master bedroom. He lied down in bed again, and he said he was just falling asleep, and all of a sudden there was a loud thud right on the cottage right behind his head, right where his head was. He said it shook the cabin, and some stuff on a little shelf above the bed actually ended up falling down on top of him. So he jumped up, grabbed the 30-30, and he ran towards the closet and put his back up against the wall. He said his dog went completely quiet. It was no longer whining or whimpering. It was just completely quiet. So he's standing there with the 30-30 and he's listening, and off to his right on the side of the cabin, all of a sudden there's another loud thud. And he said the cottage shook again. So he said he was freaking out at this point because he figured for sure this is that big bear and it's trying to come in. So he's trying to think, like, did he clean up after dinner? Did he leave some food out? Or, like, what attracted this thing? So he's standing there for a few minutes and he decides, you know what? I'm going to fire another warning shot. So on the left-hand side of the room, there's a small window, and he had that window open just to let some air into the room. So he walked over to the window, stuck the muzzle of the 30-30 out the window, and fired a shot into the ground. He said when he shot the ground, behind him on the right side of the cabin where that second thud had come from, there was just this absolute guttural roar. He said he could feel it resonating through his chest. And when it did that, he said his heart stopped. He said he put his back up against the wall and he was just clenching that 30-30 as tight as he could. He said for the remainder of the night until the dawn came, he said he was just up against the wall with the 30-30 and he was just staring towards that window intently. He figured something pokes his head by that window, he was just going to shoot it. And he didn't care what it was at this point. Now that the sun had come up a few hours later, he decided he was just going to leave. He wasn't even going to gather up his stuff. He just wanted to get out of there because this bear had come back twice now and he didn't want to deal with it, and he did not want to ever hear that roar again. So he went into the living room, he grabbed the keys for his Jeep, and grabbed the leash for his dog. He went back into the master bedroom, reached under the bed, grabbed his dog's collar, and he had to force his dog out from underneath the bed. He forces his dog out, hooks up the leash, drags his dog through the cabin to the front door, opens the cabin door, goes outside, locks the front door, and heads straight to his Jeep. Puts his dog into the Jeep, and he decides at that point, he's like, what am I doing? Why am I going to leave because of a bear? So he decides he's going to go and just kind of do a sweep around the outside of the cabin just to see any sign of this bear. So he goes walking around the cabin, and when he got to the back of the cabin, which is where his head would have been when that first thud came, he said he looked down on the ground, and there were these two massive 17-inch long bare human looking footprints in the dirt. So he's looking down at these footprints and he starts to freak out because he's not sure exactly what he's looking at. So he lifts his head and out of the corner of his eye he sees something moving through the trees. So he quickly snaps his attention that direction and he sees this 9 to 10 foot tall creature go behind this big pine tree. So he's staring at this pine tree, and he says he all of a sudden he sees a hand and part of an arm come around the one side, and a head pokes around the other side. And he says he sees this thing's face, and he freaks out. He turns and he just runs right back to his Jeep. Gets in his Jeep, and he just takes off. When he got back to his house, his parents asked him, like, why are you back already? You were going to be gone for a week. You left yesterday and now you're home now. And he said, oh, there was a big bear that was trying to get into the cabin. So his dad asked him, like, where's all your stuff and why do you have my rifle? So Brad told his dad, like, I just got out of there really quick. So Brad's dad was super mad at him now because now he didn't lock up this cabin. So now Brad's dad's going to have to go out there and do it. So Brad's dad went out to the cabin, and he came back later in the day. It was about 12, 13 hours later, because it's a 6-hour drive out there. When his dad got home, he actually called Brad into the backyard. So Brad went out to the backyard to talk to his dad, and his dad told him, hey, look, I know this wasn't a bear. Like, you need to come clean. What did you see? So Brad came clean with his dad and told him exactly what he had saw and what he had experienced. And Brad's dad told him that back in the early 70s, he had a couple of his non-buddies out there for a weekend. They just wanted to spend the weekend together because one of their buddies was going through a bit of a hard time. And one night, while they were inside the cabin, they were playing cards and drinking, they went through almost the same thing. There was a loud thud on the side of the cabin, and when his one buddy went outside, he came face to face with this thing. So Brad's dad told him that he knows that these things are out by their cabin, and he never wanted to tell his wife or his kids about them because he didn't want to ruin the wilderness for them. Brad's dad told him not to mention it to anybody. He said if he mentioned it to anybody, they're just going to think he's crazy, and if he told the authorities, that they would just lock him up and throw away the key. Brad said that he's only ever told his wife, his best friend, and his dad about this. Now, Brad's advice is if you ever go in the woods, he said don't go alone. And he said it doesn't matter if you're staying in a tent, you're staying in a cabin. He said just don't go alone, don't go unarmed. He also said though that don't fire a warning shot at these things. He said if you fire a warning shot, it just seems to trigger their aggressiveness. He figures when that Sasquatch was first on the front porch, he figures it was just curious. And when he fired that shot up into the air when he was on the porch, that it angered this thing. And at that point, that Sasquatch saw him as a threat, and that's why it assaulted his cabin. So again, his advice is just don't shoot at them. Just never go alone anywhere. just always be cautious. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I don't know about you, but if I was ever facing off against a 9 to 10 foot tall Sasquatch, pretty sure I'd want something with a little more stopping power than a 30-30. As always, though, guys, if you have any comments on this one, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But as always, thanks for coming back, and I'll see you next time.